we need to talk about what is happening in the U.S. Congress. Because if you're anything like me, the nitty-gritty of the procedures in both houses of Congress, because the procedures are different in both houses of Congress, the upper and the lower, can be sometimes confusing or convoluted. And yet, Republicans have control of both houses. The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, it's known as the SAVE Act. It's basically just elementary voter ID. This should have been passed weeks ago. Why hasn't it been? I am going to bring onto the show right now an expert in Senate procedures. She is the vice president of programs at the Conservative Policy Institute. She was the policy director for the Senate Steering Committee from 2013 to 2015, the executive director of the Senate Steering Committee from 2023 to 2024. In other words, she knows what's going on and who is to blame and what needs to happen to get the SAVE Act passed. I would like to welcome to the show Rachel Bovard. Rachel, good to see you.
Great to see you, Liz. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Rachel, let's start at the beginning here. We have the White House. We have President Trump to sign this bill. We have a majority in the Senate. We have a majority in the House. Why exactly has the SAVE Act not been passed? What is happening?
Well, it has passed out of the House twice, actually. So what we're dealing with, you have the SAVE Act, and then you have the Save America Act. And that is where we are now focusing, is the Save America Act, because I'll tell you why we had to do a second vehicle. Because the SAVE Act passed out of the House in April. It went over to the Senate, where it was then referred to the Senate Rules Committee. And Mitch McConnell is the chair of the Senate Rules Committee and doesn't like this bill. I don't know why. Inexplicably, he's never spoken on it. He doesn't like it. He bottled it up in his committee for the better part of a year, almost 300 days at this point, still sitting there. Made a determination he was not going to move it at all. And so it died effectively in his committee. It was suffocated there. So the House and Senate conservatives working together on this issue said, fine, we will take another stab at this vehicle. They made a few tweaks, a few little updates, reintroduced it in the House as the Save America Act. It passed out of the House a couple weeks ago, roughly 2 weeks at this point, and they sent it over to the Senate, and they did something very strategic this time around. They packaged it in such a way in what we call a message. So they sent it over to the Senate as a message, meaning normally to get on a bill in the Senate, you have to overcome a filibuster. When you have a message, it's privileged. You don't. So you can get onto the bill bypassing the filibuster altogether. And the second thing that was so brilliant about what they did was they didn't, when it comes over as a message, it doesn't get referred to committee. It sits at the desk, where it is just now waiting for Majority Leader John Thune to call it up. Now, will it be subject to a filibuster then? I assume it will. Democrats have said they will filibuster this bill. But there are ways in the Senate rules. There are two ways to break a filibuster. The one everyone's very familiar with is invoking cloture, which is 60 votes. But the other way is through physical exhaustion, yes, which is the old-fashioned way, which is making senators stand and speak until they physically cannot do so any longer, and then putting the question. So instead of having to break through 60 votes, you break through physical exhaustion. And then in both cases, once you've broken the filibuster, the bill passes a simple majority. So that is where things stand right now. The Senate has this bill, and there's a lot of conservatives in the Senate pushing John Thune to take it up. Obviously, the Senate's still trying to get DHS funded, but after that, it's anyone's guess.
Okay, so this is fascinating to me because, I like to consider myself pretty well informed about the workings of the government as someone who comments on and criticizes and encourages government officials to do things or not do things. And there is always some procedure in the United States Congress that I'm like, what the heck is this? I've never heard of this. Like, how does this work? The talking filibuster. So this is the nitty gritty thing that I want you to talk to me about. People are talking about bringing back the talking filibuster, which I assume would be the one you're referring to, that you can talk as long as you can, but once you can't anymore, because we can't all, stand up and talk for 2 weeks, then the bill would come to vote. Is that not in place right now? Is there, what is it? What do you mean bring back?
Yeah. So I think, it's a shorthand way people are saying it's a tradition that the Senate doesn't use anymore. But I like to say, like the Holy Spirit, the talking filibuster has always been with us. It never left. It's always been a part of the Senate's rules. It's actually from the Senate's inception. This is how the Senate broke filibusters up until 1917, when the Senate instituted the cloture rule, and that's the 60 vote requirement, the mechanical way to break a filibuster that everyone's very familiar with. But the talking filibuster has been part of the Senate's tradition since its inception. It just doesn't get utilized that often because it's physically difficult and it takes a lot of time. And there are two things senators hate more than anything else, and one is working and the other is working. So they don't like to be on the Senate floor for any significant length of time, but that's what this strategy requires. So people may remember the most famous talking filibuster of the 20th century was the one that passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It took 60 days, but Mike Mansfield, who was the majority leader at the time, forced Southern Democrats to filibuster that bill, a talking filibuster. And over the course of 60 days, he started with 40 votes. Cloture at that point was 67 votes at the time. He had 40 maybes. And over the course of 60 days, he forced this public political process because, again, when you do a talking filibuster, there's nowhere to hide, right? All the opposition, all the deliberation takes place in the public. You aren't doing anything else. He forced them to talk, and what resulted was a negotiation. Two sides, because that's the thing about the talking filibuster. Everybody hates it, right? Like, it's painful on Republicans. It's painful on Democrats. They want to get out of there. So they're forced together to come to sort of a consensus or some way of getting out of this. And at the end of the Civil Rights Act filibuster, he put a negotiated product on the floor that got 71 votes. That's the most famous talking filibuster of the 20th century. Okay.
So tell us how this would work. Like, why hasn't Senate Majority Leader Thune done this already? Why hasn't he brought it to a vote? Because bringing it to a vote would be the mechanism that would trigger the Democrats filibustering, correct?
Well, it depends how he does it. So traditionally, like in the modern Senate, where all we see is cloture votes, right? Traditionally, he would just say, well, I'm going to file cloture. I'm going to put it on the floor. It's not going to get 60 votes. Oh, well, what else do you want me to do? And then we'd move on to the next thing. That is traditionally how things are being handled in the modern Senate. What a lot of conservatives are asking John Thune to do is simply get on the bill at 51 votes, right? Because it's privileged to come over from the House. He's on the bill. He doesn't file cloture. And so this goes back to the principle that there are actually only three things ever happening on the Senate floor: a speech, a quorum call, and a vote. So if a quorum, which is the constitutional number required of senators to be there to conduct business, is 51 senators, if a live quorum establishes itself and the matter is pending before the Senate, the only thing preventing the vote from happening is a speech. Okay. And that is the theory of the talking filibuster. So if John Thune were to embark on this strategy, he would get on the bill. He'd call a live quorum. All the senators would present themselves. He would be able to put the question at that point, force the Senate to vote on this, unless Democrats get up and speak. And if they do, then you are in an old-fashioned talking filibuster, and they have to hold the floor. The only thing preventing the vote from happening on the Save America Act at that point is the ability of Democrats to physically stand and speak. And keep in mind, the lore of the talking filibuster is there for a reason. It is hard. Yeah. When you are holding the floor, you can't sit, you can't eat, you can't leave to go to the bathroom. There are no bathroom breaks. The only things you can drink are water and weirdly milk. I don't know why, but it is a grueling exercise, but that is why it's part of the strategy, right? It is imposing a physical cost of the obstruction on the filibustering party. Because if you go the cloture route, they just get to vote no and go home and go to dinner and go to bed on time and never talk about it. If you do a talking filibuster, you got to own that opposition and you got to own it in public.
Okay, so if they were to do a talking filibuster, can more than one person, like more than one Democrat, do that consecutively? They're just not allowed to like break quorum and leave? Or like are they? Or how, like, I know this is so nitty gritty, but I want to know exactly how this works so that we can have a call to action for the right people, because we have to pass this act. Like, it's literally
these are
absurd.
Great questions. Yeah, no, these are great questions. So a quorum has to establish itself, but the Senate does that through live quorums. This idea that 51 Republicans would just have to sit on the floor constantly is not true. John Thune is the only one that controls the live quorum process. And again, it's simply senators must respond to the call of their name. They must come down to the floor, register their presence, and therefore a quorum is established. You are not allowed to mess around with this. Democrats have to do it too. And in fact, in 1988, there was a talking filibuster. Republicans were trying to deny a quorum, not responding to the live quorum. Robert C. Byrd, who was the majority leader at the time, instructed the sergeant at arms to compel the presence of absent senators, which he is entitled to do under Senate's Rule 6. They found Senator Bob Packwood from Oregon hiding in his office, broke down the door, and carried him feet first onto the Senate floor.
Can we please do this? Can we please do this?
So this is part of the Senate's tradition and the Senate rules. So you establish a quorum at that point. Democrats have to be speaking. Now only one of them has to be speaking at a time. And when one person ends, the next person can get recognized and speak, but someone has to be speaking at all times. Now they can make motions, right? They can try to amend the bill. They can try to adjourn the Senate. Republicans would need to have discipline in voting those motions down.
Yeah.
Okay. If they have party discipline in doing that, there is nothing Democrats can do to this process except to continue to speak. And each senator is allowed
24 hours a day, like no recess.
24 hours a day, correct. And each senator is allowed 2 speeches on the same legislative day on the pending question. So as long as we stay on the bill, we don't have any Republicans voting for Democratic amendments, moving on to different subjects. We stay on the bill. They are limited to 2 speeches each. Now, there are some people that have pointed out, well, if every Democratic senator gave 2 8-hour speeches, this could take days and weeks. This is a strategy that takes time. Yeah, this is a strategy that takes time. But I would point out, it is absurd to suggest that Bernie Sanders, who I think is 84, is somehow going to be able to give 2 8-hour speeches. Right? They don't have the physical stamina. People tend to talk about this strategy like senators are cyborgs or they're robots or they aren't impacted by the very human physical costs of standing and speaking and implementing the strategy. Moreover, senators get bored. They hate being on the floor. They want to do other things. They're distracted. They want to go to fundraisers. They want to fly home and see their families. This compels a negotiation on a topic you would never get Democrats to talk about otherwise. So the idea is to force a negotiation that ideally, at the end of it, you get a product that even more than 51 senators support, right? Ideally, you actually could get cloture on this product at 60 or more, and the country feels bought in on it because, again, this is not some niche Republican issue. Voter ID is 83, 87% of the public support this. This is a rare bird in Washington to find an issue that has this big of a support across the country. So the idea that Republicans have a strategy here where they could force Democrats to filibuster a wildly popular issue, to me, even aside from all the Senate procedure, that's just good politics.
I know. I mean, you would think, okay, so what is happening behind the scenes right now? Is Thune trying, before embarking on, however many days or weeks of a talking filibuster, is he trying to negotiate behind the scenes to try to get cloture? Is that what the holdup is here? Or I don't know, sitting outside of the Congress right now as an American citizen, as someone who is a huge proponent of voter ID, as most people in the country are, I'm like, what's the holdup? We have Republicans in the House, Republicans in the Senate, Republican president in the White House. Let's get this done. What is happening behind the scenes that is seemingly causing this infuriating delay?
Well, we've seen, John Thune make a couple of public statements on it. He said, I want to get a vote on this bill, but he's also said that he is not necessarily in favor of a talking filibuster strategy. He's referred to ramifications, unclear what those are. He hasn't said. So I do know that the senators are talking about this. It's the senators, when they're in Washington, they meet for lunch 3 times a week behind closed doors. And this is where they have it out as a conference. This is where they talk about what they want to do, what their priorities are. They argue with each other. They've had some of those conversations. So, I think this week will be a big week for Republicans in the Senate. If they're going to decide they're going to lean in on this strategy, those conversations are probably going to happen this week.
Okay, so let's speculate on this for a second. And I know this is speculation, but if Thune is if he's hesitant about a talking filibuster and he's referring to ramifications, does that indicate to you that his caucus, or maybe him personally, I don't know, is worried that the Democrats, when they get power again, hopefully not in the midterms, knock on wood, but whenever it is that they have the majority in the Senate, that they would utilize the talking filibuster against the Republicans, and Thune is afraid of that in some way?
I mean, it's possible. I would argue that my rebuttal to that is they've always had the opportunity to do this. Like, this has been part of the Senate's rules from the beginning. And Democrats, there's a lot of misunderstanding, too, about what's being proposed, because Democrats did talk about doing a talking filibuster back in 2021, 2022. But to do it, they proposed nuking the Senate. They proposed getting rid and changing a bunch of rules in order to make a talking filibuster work for them in a way that was not hard. That is not what Republicans are proposing here. Republicans are proposing to change no rules, to just use the Senate as it exists, as it was designed. And so there's a little bit of gaslighting. I think people are confused. Well, would we have to change rules to do this? Doesn't this change the character of the Senate? No, not in what Republicans are proposing at all. So, I would say too, people say, well, yes, Democrats will be more, enthusiastic to use it against Republicans. Well, one, they can, but two, this is a hard strategy. It's a hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of time. The Senate's calendar doesn't allow for you to spend this amount of time on every question. Like, you aren't going to be able to do a talking filibuster on every single thing that comes up. And second, I would say, Democrats, voter ID is unique, as I was saying earlier, because it has such broad bipartisan support across the country. The issues that Democrats might want to launch a talking filibuster on might not be issues they want to put into the public's the public's face for as long as this would take. Can you imagine if they tried to say, we're going to force Republicans to filibuster transgender surgeries on children? Like, yes, please.
Like, thank you for the opportunity. Yes. I would like 8 hours a day on that one.
Exactly. So it's just not a particularly politically viable strategy in every case. I think it is here because of how broad the support is for this issue. But I don't think Democrats will actually want to do this on a lot of issues that they hold, positions they hold that are deeply unpopular.
Yeah, I think, too, it used to be more of a valid concern when Republicans said, hey, we want to be cautious about doing XYZ because we don't want the left to, do that same thing to us if they're in power. I even used to make that argument once in a while myself, by the way. I don't think that that's a valid argument anymore in this current political environment anyway, because the Democrats are going to do bad things regardless of how ethical, honest, or upright Republicans are. It doesn't matter. They're going to try to prosecute us. They're going to indict us. They're going to try to censor us and silence us and abuse government. And so we should just do what's right without thinking about what the Democrats might try to do to copy us, because that's the nature of the modern Democrat Party, is that's how they behave. And Republicans should not overthink that. They should just do the right thing. Okay, last question, because I know you have to go here. This has been incredibly illuminating, by the way. I feel like I fully understand what's going on there in the Senate and what needs to be done. Are there any particular pressure points, and by pressure points, I mean people, that would be highly influential in helping Thune make this decision or bringing this talking filibuster to fruition, passing this bill? Like, who needs to be addressed by us?
So I think at the end of the day, it's John Thune is the leader of the conference, but the people who are going to make this decision are the Senate conference themselves. Right? Thune is pretty responsive to his members. And so if the senators themselves say, yes, John, this is something we want to do, he's going to do it. So I would encourage everybody to just get as educated as possible about this. I know everybody thinks Senate procedure is very hard and complicated, but it's really very rational. I have a piece up at the Federalist. If you just search for my name and articles by me, I have a response actually that I did to Kim Strassel at the Wall Street Journal, which I think could be illuminating for some people in how this works. And just have some good faith conversations with your senators. Because I think at the end of the day, I want to keep the filibuster. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's good for the country, but I understand the frustration that has built up around it, because all people see is 60. You don't get 60. Oh, well, nothing to do. Using a talking filibuster, which is, again, the alternative way to break a filibuster, I actually think is a cathartic exercise. It allows Americans to see their Senate working for them. Right? Maybe it doesn't work at the end of the day. Maybe it does. But it's the ability to deliberate in public, to act on behalf of the voters that sent you there, is what people don't see from the Senate anymore. And that's ultimately, I think, why this strategy has caught so much headwind and so much steam among the base, because this is what we want. We just, we want a pulse. We want you to look a little lively up there in Washington. So I think, the one-on-one conversations could be really helpful.
Okay. I think that's correct too. We also need to encourage our senators. You said before, like, they would have to have incredible stamina to withstand all of the motions and amendments and changes to this bill. We need to encourage them to be incredibly strong and don't compromise for the sake of compromise, or because you don't have to. You don't have to say yes to anything that the Democrats ask for. You can stand strong with your voters, because this is, I would say, this is the number one issue for a lot of voters, is election integrity. And this is where it starts. Okay, we'll have you back when there are updates, Rachel, just because you say Senate procedure is not complicated, it's just rational, and that makes me laugh because it is in fact complicated. Rachel's just incredibly smart and knowledgeable about this and knows how to communicate it so that it seems very simple, but it actually is incredibly complicated. We'll have you back when there are updates so that you can explain it further to us. Thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Liz.
Okay, guys, also, you should read her article on the Federalist. It is very helpful. It's essentially what she was saying to us, but in written form. Our movement is gaining ground. People around us are waking up. The mainstream media leftist narrative is cracking. At Blaze TV, we've built a home for some of the strongest, smartest voices in conservative media. When you subscribe to Blaze TV, you're not just watching content, you're supporting a movement. You're backing creators who think for themselves. It's everything that the networks won't show you, delivered on your terms on any device, anytime. And it starts at just $8 a month. BlazeTV.com/Liz, promo code Liz.